Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Balin. I'm one of the co-founders of REI 360, also one of the principals of Hard Money Bankers, one of the premier hard and private money lenders, and I actually do all the underwriting at Hard Money Bankers. So today is a very interesting topic. It's actually a topic that I probably like the most in real estate, and it's how to analyze comparable sales and accurately determining the value of your real estate investment. I pretty much spend each and every day looking at comps, looking at property valuations, analyzing deals either to lend on or acquire for our company. And I also help other real estate investors kind of creatively analyze their transactions as well. So let's get started. I want to kind of run through this stuff as quick as possible. Although analyzing properties may not sound like it's all that fun, it's very important and arguably the most important thing, because you need to understand some key things related to valuations of exactly what type of property you're purchasing. If it's kind of the valuation of as day one, which is the as-is value, all the way down to your completed value. So this is what we're going to learn today. I'm going to go through exactly what comparables are, comps, where you can find and pull comps, because there's a lot of different places to pull comps, especially one new proprietary platform inside of REI 360. Why comps are your own opinion of value and should be pulled by yourself and not by others, no matter what your experience level is. How a valuation differs based upon your end goal. Different variables to consider when pulling comps. Other resources to help valuation. And also how I and other experienced investors pull and analyze comps for our own deals. So what exactly are comps? Comps or comparables are similar sold properties to a subject property that you're trying to confirm the value for. Comparable properties are usually close in proximity, style, size, condition, etc. So in a nutshell, a comparable is just an evaluation of a particular piece of real estate. You may have heard the term, let's see, market analysis, comps, BPO, appraisal, market value. I mean, these are all different types of valuation, different valuations, but what they're all doing is finding like kind or comparable properties that have been recently sold based off of the type of transaction that you're doing. And kind of put together into a report. As real estate investors, we don't necessarily need a formal appraisal or BPO or market analysis. All that stuff's great. They're all typically done by different types of service providers. But for you as a real estate investor, you need to understand the actual comps and don't just base it off of what a real estate agent says or what an appraiser says. This is something that's really important, that you need to get the data from different service providers or get the data yourself and then kind of come up with your own decision based on those comparables of what the property is worth, because that's very important. And if you're completely new at this, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage other people that you may know or services so you can come up with a proper comparable yourself. So that's where we're at. And also, just so you know, this is targeted towards residential property. We've done, there's very different within evaluating properties between commercial and residential stuff. So this is residential real estate that I'm talking about, typically 1 to 4 family. Okay, so moving on, where you can find and access and pull comps. So usually most comps are pulled on a local multiple listing service, also known as MLS. So if you have access to that, that's great. You can pull that. Typically that's given to real estate agents or appraisers. Having access to that's great. That pretty much what it's doing is aggregating data from a bunch of different data providers and pulling it into MLS, and then a lot of the user input from local real estate agents are adding their stuff to it. So it's pulling public records, and then the real estate agents are adding things to it. So that's one place to pull comps. You can obviously just also ask a real estate agent to pull comps on a particular property for you. The only problem is you're basing it off of what they feel are the right comps, which might not necessarily be the right comps. You can go to free or paid services like Zillow or Trulia or other online tools. They offer market data and comparables that are pulled from some of their data sources and put together online for you. Sometimes, depending on, a lot of their stuff there is based off tax records. So sometimes the data is good, sometimes it's not good. So you gotta kind of go to multiple different places and kind of come up with your own tool sets yourself, and kind of take that data for what it's worth and analyze it yourself. You can always ask an appraiser. They typically have access to MLS, or they go under public record searches and they pull data that way. Appraisers are typically better for bank loans. That's typically what they're there for, is to for a bank to appraise a property or an estate or something like that. As real estate investors, the appraiser is not the best thing to get, because you're looking for comparables for a few different things. If you're looking to flip the property, you may be looking as an after repair value. If you're looking to do a quick flip or just wholesale the property, you may want to know what the as is value is. There's a few different kind of formulas based off of what your exit is as a real estate investor, and typically the skill set that you have and what you learn as a real estate investor would supersede what the real estate agent or appraiser's intentions have in mind. The real estate agents are typically just for reselling to a homeowner, and appraiser may be looking at the interests of a bank. So not that those aren't good resources, because they obviously certainly are, and a lot of them overlap and are real estate investors themselves. But you kind of got to determine your own way to evaluate and to pull comparables for your particular purpose of the transaction. So there's also state tax records, which is really important. And a state tax record could be like a public record of who the property owner is, how long they've owned it for, when the last transfer date is, the tax assessed value, things like that. And there's also called something like land records, and some states are public, some states are not. So some you can access on it for free online, and it tells you information like when the most previous deed was recorded, or a deed of trust or mortgage was recorded, so you can get some data from that. And then finally, Ecom's 360. Ecom's 360 is the proprietary comparable search tool that after a lot of work, REI 360 recently rolled out. And what it is it takes a lot of this data, aggregates it all into one, and puts it in one kind of clean setup for you. And let me see. You know what? Let's take a look at REI 360 real quick at Ecom's 360, so you can see exactly how it works, and then we'll kind of go through some other things. Some really kind of important things, but at least you can kind of see some good data here. So this is REI 360's Ecom's 360 that we developed. And what this is it's pulling data from a bunch of different service providers. So let's just take this address right here. Search. Okay. It's 5306 Debbie Court. This property is in Howard County, which is a suburb of in between Baltimore and Washington. Here's the overall property details related to it. So you got counties, beds, baths. The use code is single family, year built 1985. All of these things are really pertinent information. I spent a lot of time developing this along with some other folks that analyze deals associated with REI 360, because these were all things that we needed to see and data that we needed to pull in order to make proper decisions to value deals that we lent on or deals that we purchased. So all this information, a lot of this information is pulling through tax records, and then some of this stuff related to estimates and things like that is pulling from other data providers. So let's go through here. There's actually photos that pop up if there's photos associated with it. This is probably a property that didn't list for sale recently, so there's probably not many. Let's see, last sold date. Did sell around a year ago. So technically, there should have been photos, but there isn't at this time. Okay, so here's the tax record. So most states have, at this point, have online property searches. And through eComms 360, you can click right here. Instead of going to the state site, it's already there. Sometimes the link goes to a state site, and then you actually have to type in the address again. It just happens that in Maryland it opens straight up. So some very interesting information related to who the owners are, the location, and the structure. Subdivision information is always popular and important, because if you know the subdivision, then you can do a search based off that subdivision. And usually everybody in usually in a subdivision, there's only about 3 to 5 different styles of properties, and most people in the same subdivision all go to the same school. Most of them were built by similar builders or the exact same builder. So, and there's they're usually pretty easy to comp out properties that are in actual subdivisions. Here's some transfer information, and here's some transfer prices of when it was changed over. So it looks like this was actually a non-arm's length transaction, meaning that it looks like, I don't know, they must have sold this property, or bought this property, and then they may have sold it to either a family member or themselves, or maybe a husband or a wife, or maybe a relative for zero consideration. So, okay, anyway, so that's that. Some tax assessment websites have more information than others. This is just Maryland's. Okay, so going back to here. Here's some estimate data that's aggregated from certain sites. Here's the estimate value range, 30-day change. We decided to put 30-day change in because it's really important. If you're going through comparables, which we'll go through in a second, these things, with 30-day change, if they're all red and they're all negative, that means you're probably in a declining market, or at least in a declining little city or town or subdivision. Also did price per square feet, because that's really important to understand, and to kind of base your valuation on. And we also did rent estimates, because this may be a type of property that you're purchasing to rent, or you're selling to investor who's going to rent it out. So we need to know the rents in that area. If you do a comp search right here, you can actually click on the comps. These are all based off of proximity, starting with the closest. And if you take this little guy and put this right here, you can actually do street views as well. So anytime you pull comps, you do need to see some sort of pictures. Obviously recent pictures too. As a real estate investor, or anyone related to valuing properties, you always have to go look at the property, because even though pictures are really important and provide the majority of the data, you just got to go check it out for yourself. You never know. I mean, this picture is great, but what it doesn't show is, who knows? Maybe it doesn't have a back of a house. The back of the house may be ripped off, or there may be, I don't know, some sort of well or some sort of permanent fixture just hanging out the back, or there may be power lines, or there may be something that you just don't know. Your neighbor's backyard may be all messed up. So it's really important to kind of take a look at that. So here are all the comps. Everything's through distance and proximity. And kind of the most important stuff to look at on the surface, until you kind of dig in and go look at the property yourself, is year built, last sold date, last sold price, estimate value, plus or minus in the last 30 days if it's increasing or decreasing. Rent estimates if you're looking to rent it out, beds, baths, square footage of lot size and square footage of the house. So this one is 2412 is the square footage of the property, and the lot size is 20,909, which is just less than an acre. Just less than a half acre, and then price per square foot. So that's eComms 360, which is a really, really powerful tool. And until now, most real estate investors did not have access to pulling comparables and pulling property data. They'd have to go to multiple sources to do it, or they'd have to call a real estate agent to have them help them. So, keep in mind that this stuff is the facts and it's data, but it's still your opinion of what you feel the property is worth. And I'm going to go a little bit further in depth related to that, because just because this was sold recently for $375, and just because this data shows that now the estimate's about $400,000, just because all these other properties sold maybe around 400 mark does not mean that this thing is worth $400,000. Data is data, and a lot of that stuff is facts, but you need to kind of voice your own opinion based off of what you feel the true valuation is, and because that's the only way to kind of make sure your numbers work. Okay, so let's go back into this. Okay, where were we? Already went through this. Where were we? Okay. So, why comps are your own opinion of value and should be pulled yourself? Is that where we are? Let's double check. Okay. So, you need to create and voice your own opinion by accessing data, yours and others, through experience, facts, and common sense. Ecom's 360, MLS, all that other, Zillow, Trulia, all that stuff has data, but the data is part of it. You need to make sure, you take that data to the right use and make sure the value is the value. So what we'll typically do is we'll take the data, then we may chat with real estate agents or other real estate investors, or maybe even neighbors, and try to figure out what's going on in that area, what the market's looking like, trying to dig a little bit deeper related to the deal. So a few things that I'm going to get to are different factors that come into play related to my next door neighbor's house sold for $300,000, my house should sell for $300,000, and it's the exact same house. That may be the case, but is the neighbor on your other side, maybe their whole house is ripped down, so so the house isn't going to sell as much. There's a lot of things. So the purpose of where I'm getting at is you need to make your own opinion of a valuation. And just because the 3 houses on your this block that you're trying to buy sold for $400,000 does not necessarily mean that your house will sell, that your subject property house will sell for $400,000. And it very may will sell for more, but you gotta prove that by looking at all the stuff. Okay. So the other thing is, and the next slide after this is the really, really important. So hang tight with me as I get to that. But how evaluation differs based upon your end goal. So if your end goal is to wholesale the deal, retail the deal, rehab to rent, sell as is, there's a bunch of different things related to it. So let's say you think your ARV is $200,000, or it is $200,000. That may be the case at $50,000 rehab, but it may only be worth $180,000 ARV with $25,000 rehab, with half the rehab. That being said, if you say what are the comparables of this property, somebody's not going to say, well, it could be 180, it could be 190, it could be 200, it could be 210. They're going to say $200,000, because when you ask somebody like a real estate agent or appraiser of what the comps are, they typically give you a number. The comps are $200,000. So when people call me and say, "Hey, I'm buying this property. What are the comps?" or "This is the value," it's like, it could be the value, but that's not necessarily the case until you get a little bit more information of what you're looking to do. So Washington, D.C. is a very hot market right now, and it's very interesting because if you don't know Washington, D.C., you could potentially get killed getting yourself, and not literally killed, but financially killed by investing in the wrong part without knowing it. So Capitol Hill is a very desirable area. But you could be one block in the wrong direction on Capitol Hill, and it could be worth $100,000 less. So let's say a property near Capitol Hill sells for $600,000. Well, one block away could be $500,000. And when you're pulling comps or comparables, or somebody is doing that on behalf, and you say, sure, this is a city. I'm not going to go too far away. I'm only going to go on a 3-block radius or a 2-block radius or a 1-block radius. A 1-block radius could be too much in that particular area. So that's where experience, other service providers, things like that. Just because you may be new or just new to that area doesn't mean that you can't invest there, but you have to do proper due diligence. And sometimes it's not just, pull comp and tell me what the property's worth and take it from there. You gotta kind of be creative, and typically you can say, okay, you look outside the box, say, okay, this property sold for $600 and it's really nice. This property sold for $500, it's really nice. What are the reasons why it sold for $100,000 difference? And it may not just be that it's a block away. It could be that the quality of the improvements were awful, or the builder, this one builder is more desirable than another builder. But those are all things that through due diligence you got to determine. So another big thing about mostly city properties and higher end neighborhoods in the city, we can use DC for example, and we can even use Baltimore for example. Some of the nicer properties closer to the water, in like Federal Hill or Cannon or Fells Point, which are some little areas of Baltimore. Obviously areas of Baltimore aren't nearly as expensive as areas of DC. But on a percentage level, they're equivalent. So, for instance, there are certain upgrades. We'll get a lot of inquiries, or we get a lot of people that say, "Hey, I'm buying this property. It's in DC, 1,600 square feet. Comps say 600,000. It only needs 20 grand to work." Well, 20 grand to work is nothing. $20,000 worth of work could mean a kitchen and nothing else. And I'm not saying you can't renovate some properties for $20,000, but the word renovate means very different things. It could mean full renovation, partial renovation, crappy cabinet renovation, high-end granite renovation. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So I know from experience, because through Hard Money Bankers, we funded, by the end of this year, could be almost 1,000 deals, and a lot of the stuff's in the DC area. And anybody who's doing good renovations on good properties in DC are spending a minimum of $100,000. A minimum of $100,000. They could go into a livable property and they rip out everything and they put new electrical, new ductwork, new plumbing, new everything. They're making it into a new home. And $100,000 is on the light side, but that's where it's at. And they sell for $600,000 or more, depending on the area. And they have a quality product, a very, very quality product. So if you're a real estate investor and you're coming in and you're saying, here, there's 3 properties on my block and it sold for $600,000. I'm buying this at, $350, got a great deal on it. I only needs 40 grand and I'm going to list for 600 and I'll make a home run. Well, you're wrong, because it's not going to happen. And what you need to figure out is, it's not just your construction that's your issue, it's your ARV and your valuation that you need to check. So you could put in $40,000 or $50,000 and make it livable, fine, but you need to value that thing probably at $450 or $500, not $600. So your valuation based off of your end goal is really important. And I'm not saying it's not a good deal if you're going to put $350, buy for $350, put in 50 grand and list at whatever $499. That's a little bit light. I guess if you're doing all cash, maybe that works, but that's a marginal deal at best. But regardless, you need to understand your end goal in place in order to sell for the most. There's guys out there doing very quality work, and buyers aren't dumb. Buyers know quality work versus other quality work, especially at high price points. If your price point is resale at $80,000, maybe you only need $20,000 into the deal, or maybe it's a tenant property and they can live with laminate instead of Brazilian cherry, or they want I don't know, some kind of hollow cabinets instead of nice higher end quality, and they don't need tile or any of that stuff. That's fine. I'm not saying do a higher end or lower end rehab. You just need to understand that it's important to figure out what you're looking to do at the end goal, so you can kind of plan and evaluate your property accordingly, because all that stuff is taken into consideration. And sometimes it could get a little bit scary on the higher end stuff. If your resale's $1 million and you're 5% off, that's a good amount. If you're 5% off on $100,000, it may not be as bad. So, you gotta base your end goal, your valuation based off of your end goal, because that's super important. Moving on, different variables to consider when pulling comps. Okay, this is one of my favorite things, and these are all things that I look at regularly, and 95% of real estate investors overlook some of these things. And these could be things that could be deal breakers, and a big difference. Market conditions. You need to understand the market conditions. If you're new at real estate investing, do some Google searches, call a real estate agent, spend some time on eComps 360, see if you have a trending in one direction or the other, if it's red in certain areas, negative, positive, see what kind of those numbers are. If you're in a bad market or a good market, it doesn't really matter. You just need to understand the market conditions. If every month it's depreciating 1%, so every year you're depreciating 12%, that's fine. But you just need to understand that, so you know that if you're going to carry a property for a full year, it's going to be worth 12% less than it is today. So work your numbers accordingly. Neighbor's house, really good story that we have. So we did a loan for a guy based on his exit off it just happened to be in $600,000. It was in I think it was in Petworth in Washington D.C. and he bought it. We thought it was worth $600,000. He thought it was worth $600,000. He put it on the market 3 months later, still worth $600,000. No contracts after 30 days. We still thought it was worth $600,000. No contracts after 60 days. Still thought it was $600,000. If we wrote the exact same loan, we thought it was $600,000. The issue is the neighbor's house had a barking dog, and their house was always a mess, and it was an attached property, and it was very difficult to get buyers in there. And buyers they loved the house. The product was great, but they had some concerns because they always had this barking dog. The house next door was a mess. It was completely not under the control of you as the investor or this investor at the time. The house ended up selling for $550,000. I still think it's worth $600,000. He still did too. That being said, it did not. It sold for $550,000. So that is something to take into consideration. Power lines. Typically, power lines are 10% depreciation. That's what the industry says. I probably would call it 3 to 5%, depending on how the power lines are and where they're located and how they run through your yard. But some people don't care. Some cultures and some people in general don't care if they can get a discount to buy a property in a neighborhood, or it's got everything else. They're willing to pay full retail for it. It's fine. Not saying there's positive or negative. You just got to take in consideration when you're comparing a property. Does this one have power lines and this one doesn't? Double yellow lines, 10%. Typically, a double yellow line property also means that it doesn't sit in a subdivision. That's not the case all the time, but a lot of double yellow line properties you really need to be aware of, especially with kids, fast drivers. Double yellow line is where it's, there's a double yellow line, do not pass, and there's cars going in both directions. Typically, that's not in like a normal residential neighborhood. It's kind of a passer street in between it. Doesn't necessarily mean a highway, but it could just be like kind of a main drag street. Typically, it's 10% off, but it doesn't hurt to try to find comps on that exact street, even if you have to go look back to previous dates, so you can determine what others are sold for. A good example is look at public records based off of. So let's say this property is. You think it's going to resell for $200,000, and then other ones in the neighborhood are selling for $220,000, but because this is double yellow lines, you think it's closer to $2. Well, go back, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and see some of the trends that happened back then. Square footage, square footage is important, so if you're comparing, obviously proper size properties. You can also kind of deduct or add value based off of the actual square footage. If your property is smaller or bigger than neighborhood properties, then you can say, okay, my house is 300 square feet bigger than everything else. Seems like the average square foot is 200 a foot. I'll add some money to mine because it's 300 square feet bigger. Beds and baths. typically when I pull, we pull comps, we look at beds and baths. The difference between a 3-bed and a 2-bath and a 4-bed and a 2-bath doesn't seem to have too much difference in value, but it could be, depending on when the property was built, the style of the home, who the builder was. There's a lot of properties that a 3-bedroom and a 4-bedroom is the exact same square footage, except one of the bedrooms is significantly larger, because the family or the household, only had 2 kids and not 3 kids or something, and they didn't need the extra bedroom, so they'd rather have a larger bedrooms. So just because it's an extra bedroom doesn't mean it's worth an extra so and so money. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Basement, finished, unfinished, or even has a basement. There's a lot of properties, especially when you get closer to the water, that do not have basements. But you go a few blocks away and they may have a basement. Having a basement with additional square footage could mean a lot of different value. So, keep in mind also that tax assessments are usually based off of above ground square footage, and square footage you see on tax records are typically above ground square footage. So you may have to do some additional researching if it does have a basement, and put some valuation to that, or subtract valuation from that. Year built, obviously newer houses are usually more desirable unless you're in kind of an historic area, or unless you're in a subdivision that has older houses and they have the older touches to it. So just kind of take that in consideration. Floor plan, there's areas in special, there's areas that, floor plans, the older style floor plans aren't as adaptable to common needs as the newer style floor plans. For instance, washers and dryers used to always be in the basement. Now times they're in, laundry rooms, off the master bedroom, or on the first floor by the kitchen. Floor plans are certainly have to be taken into consideration. Style of the property, you can't compare a rancher to a colonial. A rancher is like a 1-level type of property, and a colonial is kind of a 2-level that has both. Both levels are typically the same square footage. When you're looking at properties, make sure you identify ranchers, Cape Cods, colonials, a bunch of different style properties, so you're comparing the right ones. We looked at a property today that was a rancher, and it had the exact same square footage above ground as a colonial did. It was very difficult to evaluate, because if you base it off of a cost per square footage, they'd be the exact same, because they're all above ground square footage. But colonials typically are more desirable than ranchers. And a colonial is also kind of a newer style than a rancher as well. So, being more desirable and being desirable are still kind of different, because someone who's retired or has a health issue and can't use stairs, they may love the rancher, but then a newer, younger couple may love a colonial. So just take some of that stuff into consideration. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the newer model properties are typically designed purposely for the demographics of the neighborhood. So if you notice, a lot of builders or real estate developers that come in, they'll tear down smaller rancher-style houses and build bigger colonial-style houses. Number one, because they can get a bigger property on that piece of land, so there's more value to it. But it's that's what more people want. So take that in consideration. Quality of upgrades, that goes back to what we talked about, that property in DC. You can't value a property if everything's going for $600,000 and you're just going to put lipstick on a pig, paint and some carpet. You can't expect to sell that for top value when everybody else is going in there and rebuilding a entire new house. Original builder. Different areas have a lot of different custom or big home builder tract building companies. And someone may say, "Oh, I don't buy from Ryan Homes," or someone says, "I only buy from Centex Homes." Some builders have stigmas against them, and some are very desirable. So just take that in consideration, because some builders have better reputations than others. School systems, probably one of the most important things. If you go a few blocks or half a mile away, sometimes you may be in a different school system. So double check there's a lot of, kind of Ecom's 360 has this, but some of the properties don't push the data in. Most do, but some don't. But you got to check out the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school to pull a proper comp. You typically want only properties that filter into that exact same school district and that have that same zip code. But double check that. It doesn't mean you can't pull a comp elsewhere, but try to do some market research so you understand brick, siding, etc. Most people like brick a little bit better than siding. It costs a little bit more. It looks a little bit nicer. Take that in consideration. A house we recently bought had brick, and the next door neighbors was siding. We were trying to figure out the valuation difference. It probably wasn't that much more, but it could be. Previous owner, you can usually, where I put previous owner out there, you can usually get some information related to the property on the previous owner and kind of how their lifestyles were and their habits. Elevation, one thing that's overlooked sometimes is there's the desirability based off of if they have a walkout basement or not walkout basement. Also, if there's walk-up stairs up to your front door. Also, where does the house face, or where is it back up to? A lot of houses, could face, whatever. They could face an apartment building, or it could back up to a highway. Take that in consideration. Those are things that are hard to tell doing a Google Street or Google Maps through REI, through Ecoms 360. But it's important. That's also why you kind of look at that property, so you can get your gut feel based off of it. Also, in and out of a subdivision, having a property outside of an actual subdivision is really hard to value. Being in a subdivision is a lot easier. I'm not talking about city properties. City properties, you can do kind of more of a proximity or a radius search, but let's say you have a subdivision that has 250 properties on it, and then there's a highway that leads you to it, and there's a highway maybe that goes north, south, east, west, 2 highways, and then there's houses sitting on that highway, and typically those houses were probably significantly older and smaller for that matter, because they were there because at one point that house, your subdivision, or the subdivision, was probably all farmland. It was all something. So I don't know. It could have been anything. And then they had a bunch of houses, and then years and years later they built a subdivision. So the houses that sit outside the subdivision, even if it's one house outside the subdivision, could be significantly different in value than the one that sits in the subdivision. So that's something to take into consideration. And recent activity. So recent activity is really important. For several reasons. You need to double check the days on the market in the subdivision, in that general area. If you're in a hot market and something is sitting on the market for 60 days, there's probably a reason, and it's typically because any property will sell at the right price. So recent activity is really important to look at when you're purchasing a property and when you're reselling a property. If everything is selling very quickly on the retail side, after you've renovated a house to resell it, then that's a good sign. That stuff's moving and there's supply and demand in that area. So double check that. All right, moving on. So other resources to help valuation: call other experts or investors that know that area and that have done business in that area. I'm constantly calling other real estate investors or other private lenders or realtors maybe that are experts in that particular area. There's nothing wrong with getting someone else's opinion on something. It's hard to know every single area. Our company, our lending company services a very wide area because we know the area, but there's subdivisions and there's certain kind of spots that it's really hard to tell. So there's nothing wrong with asking someone else their opinion. Land records or title records, again through Ecoms 360, which REI 360 members have. You can look at the title, not the title records, the tax records directly through the comp search, so you can easily check it that way. But you can look at land records. Some states you can assess it, and you can actually look at previous deeds that have been recorded, mortgages and things like that. So dig a little bit deeper into the property. Look at pictures from if recently listed or previous pictures. You can usually do that by just doing a Google search and seeing if they show up on a Zillow or Google Images. See if there's any other images associated with the listing ahead of time. And obviously check previous sales prices and dates, just to make sure everything's up to date, and you know when the property's last sold. you'd be amazed if you kind of look outside the box a little bit, and then you look at trends of maybe 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, and you kind of compare when the property sold and how much compared to other neighbors' houses, and obviously the length of the listing. You want to make sure you understand how long these properties sit on the market for, and anything that sits on the market for a long period of time is obviously a red flag, especially if it's in a hot market. So here's the fun stuff. How do I and other experienced investors pull and analyze comps? Well, until eComps 360 came out, it was just kind of local MLS among some other internet searches, but accessed MLS. Now that we have eComps 360, I use the MLS as well as eComps 360. eComps 360 takes all the data and kind of puts it into one place and gives me a good understanding of everything in kind of a much more organized format than my local MLS does. just so you know, the multiple listing MLS, there's different regions for it. So the DC region may be different. Washington DC region is different than the Philadelphia region to the New York region, and actually a lot of the regions are even broke down into subsectors. So in Washington D.C., I have access to Washington and Baltimore, but I don't have access to anything kind of east or west for the most part. Those kind of overlap with other regions. So so eComps 360 will give you a real good understanding of that, and that's what I use to collaborate data. And then I also do go on the local MLS as well, to kind of confirm some numbers. Google Maps is built into eComps 360, and you can look at Street View, so you can actually see what the property looks like. You can do satellite searches and street searches just like Google Maps. So before eComps 360, I used to go to just Google and do the search, but now it's built in there. I also go under land records to see previous recorded deeds, see who the prior owners was, recording dates, mortgages that were taken out, who the mortgage lender was, to see if it was like a bank loan or the type of bank. Not all states have very easy access to land records. Out of the 3 states that I lend in, only one of them has a good land record system. You can always go down to the state office and get most of this data, but I like to do things from my computer, especially all my due diligence first before going anywhere. So if your state has stuff, great. Also, probably the 2 next things are probably the most important thing that besides kind of pulling the data, which eComps 360 or local MLS can do, is I contact others that may be of assistance. I don't think I know it all, and there's a lot of people that know more than me, especially in this industry. Even though I've underwritten and looked at lots and lots of deals, I can't know everything, and neither can you. So I would recommend on deals that you're uncomfortable with, either contacting a local real estate agent or a friend of yours that knows the area, or other real estate investor, or someone at a real estate investor association meeting, maybe another private lender, someone that you think has done business in that area, and just pick their brain related to it. It doesn't, there's not one day that goes by that I don't pick up the phone and contact a third party that says, hey, I'm looking at this project, I'm thinking about purchasing it, tell me what your thoughts are on it, how much you think I can resell it for, and things like that. Really, really, really important. So don't hesitate to do that. If you don't know many people in your marketplace, feel free to contact a local real estate agent and go that way. So I wouldn't take exactly what they say to be 100% everything. You have to use your kind of knowledge as well, but just utilize it. Maybe hit up 2 or 3 different real estate agents and ask for an opinion of, hey, I'm looking to purchase a property in this area that I'm going to resell. If you were the listing agent and you need to sell this property quickly for me, how much would you list it for? How much do you think realistically we would get for it? So, or hit up a private lender and say, I'm looking to buy this property and renovate it and resell it. Potentially like to use you guys to do the loan for me. How much would you lend on it? And based off their requirements, so if they say, hey, I'll lend I don't know, 130,000 on it, and they typically do 65% LTV loans, they know they're valued at 200,000. So don't feel bad with contacting people. You can always talk to neighbors as well if you're unsure. So there might be some properties that you're confident in, and maybe you don't need to contact people. But if you're unsure, definitely do. And obviously, common sense. Figure out what your gut's telling you. There's a lot of deals that I know that have probably passed on just because for one reason or the other something just smelled funny. It just didn't really make sense. Even though the numbers may have worked, or I would have thought that they worked, I just couldn't put it together in my head. And because of that, I punted and I moved on to another transaction that I purchased. So there's a lot of unique types of deals out there, especially in the real estate investment world. If you're getting leads from all over the place, you're always going to get that one kind of oddball deal, or that white elephant, or the one property that just sits right outside the neighborhood, or the oddball deal. So, use as much common sense as you can. And if you can make it work, great. If you can't, nothing's wrong with that. And if you're unsure, just lowball it. If a seller wants $100,000 for a property and you think it's worth, I don't know, $200,000. Let's say the seller wants $100,000 and you see everything at $100,000, but this one's a little bit different. Offer them $80,000. Or on the other side, if everything's selling for $200,000, you're really sure everything's selling for $200,000, but there's just that one thing in the back of your head that says, well, this one sits on a weird elevation compared to the other ones, or this one backs up to this. Lowball it. Base it off 190 or 180 and work yourself backwards. So I hope this training was really valuable for everybody. Again, my name is Jason Balin, co-founder of REI 360. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any other staff members of REI 360. We're always here to help. And make sure you do your due diligence on any property that you're pulling comps on, so you make the right investment decision. Thank you.